Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I am delighted that Come Carpentier has joined us. We're going to talk about France, which has just had a whole bunch of legislators push for a ban on the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this echoes what's happening in America, where President Trump has already signed a few rules and regulations, as it were, to push for the ban of many Muslim Brotherhood affiliates. Now, legislators in America are pushing for more. Uh, is the Muslim Brotherhood finally getting the pushback in the West that many have long asked for? To discuss all of this, Kom has joined us. Kom, thank you.
Thank you, Hindol. Happy Republic Day and good morning.
Good morning and a very happy Indian Republic Day to you. We are, of course, recording this on the 26th of January, which is, of course, Indian Republic Day. Happy Republic Day once again to you, Kom. What's happening in France? Is the pushback finally happening?
There has been a discussion in Parliament followed by a vote whereby a majority led by the right-wing parties have asked for France to implement the recommendation of the European Union, the European Council, and the European Parliament to ban the Muslim Brotherhood and affiliated organizations. So this is only a vote. It's been opposed by the left, especially the, unsubmitted France, as it's called in French, La France Insoumise. And, but of course, in a way, by taking this decision, the majority of parliament is joining the call originally from the right-wing parties, which were long being vilified for being racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic. So now it seems that there is a majority building on grounds of national security and in conformity with the European Union's decision, or at least recommendation. There was a long report prepared and published by a number of former high-level civil servants in France that explain the concern that the French authorities have about the penetration of the Muslim Brotherhood in many areas of public policy and also in education and, generally speaking, in shaping ideology within the French public and even within French high-level institutions.
So, of course, echoes, as I was saying, what's happening in America. Talk to me a little bit about the connections therein. In the Western world, is awareness growing about this? I mean, after all, such conversations have also happened in the UK, but of course, no such legislative move, I think, has occurred there yet. But certainly the pushback seems to be, at least in public narrative, greater.
You have to go back to the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was set up in 1928 in Egypt, and which was partly inspired by the saga of Jamaluddin Afghani, an Iranian who was in India at the time of the 1857 First War of Independence, and who became very concerned when he saw that one of the great Islamic empires, the Mughal Empire, had been defeated and dismantled by the British. In parallel with other colonial actions being taken by other Western powers, and felt that Muslim civilization might be entirely enslaved and that there would be no Muslim state left. So he led a revolutionary action trying to assassinate the Shah of Iran, whom he saw as I would say an ally or a, cooperator with the Western influence. And he took refuge in Turkey, where he propagated his ideology, and he had a number of followers in Egypt, especially Hassan al-Banna, who in 1928 founded the Muslim Brotherhood. It was meant to be purely a political reform movement and a social reform movement, but it acquired the militant, violent activity or profile when some radicals joined and called for violent action, revolutionary action, to overthrow Western-controlled governments in Muslim nations. As a result of which, right from the middle of the 20th century, the Muslim Brotherhood was banned in Egypt and in several other countries, and many of its leaders were imprisoned and executed. However, that was not successful in crushing the Muslim Brotherhood. It survived. It even expanded. And as we all know, after the 2011 revolution in Egypt, Square Revolution, there was a Muslim Brotherhood president who was elected as president of Egypt. And that lasted only 1 year because then he was overthrown by the army. And as we all know, in most Muslim countries, the Muslim Brotherhood could not be defeated by democratic action. It always was defeated by the military through coups and rather violent and sometimes savage repression. So the situation is that the Muslim Brotherhood is obviously a grassroots movement, and it feeds off the discontent and frustration of Muslim masses, particularly against Muslim regimes and against monarchies that are seen as submissive to the West. The latest events in Gaza and in other parts of the Muslim world have reinforced the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood among many people, including the many Muslims who now live in Europe and are European citizens. So the reaction of the European Union and of several European countries can be understood in that context, particularly because what happened in Gaza and the increasing frustration felt in many parts of the world about Israeli actions. So you can also see in both the American and the European reactions the influence of the Israeli lobby, because obviously the Israeli lobby is extremely powerful and it can influence decisively European governments, probably much more than Muslim policies or Muslim movements can. But there you see a fight between two ideological forces, Pan-Zionism on the one hand and, of course, Pan-Islamism on the other, although the Muslim Brotherhood is opposed in many Muslim countries by governments which claim to be Islamic, but which are very concerned about the Brotherhood's agenda, which entails the elimination of national governments in many countries of the Muslim world and their replacement with a unified Muslim commonwealth that would be ruled by a caliph, whatever that means. It is understood to be a democratic movement because they want the power of the people, but the power of the people would be expressed in, I guess, the election or the selection of a Khalifa, who would be the supreme head of the Muslim world. So it is very much a theocratic movement which claims to have a democratic organization and agenda, just like, the Islamic Republic of Iran is officially a democratic country, but is under Velayat al-Faqih, the guidance of the religious leaders.
The Muslim Brotherhood, as you were saying, is getting a pushback and has always traditionally had a pushback in countries like across the Middle East or West Asia. UAE, for instance, and many other countries banned the Muslim Brotherhood. So does Saudi Arabia. Across West Asia, many countries have traditionally had a great fear and dislike for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, there are, of course, Muslim Brotherhood ideological echoes in South Asia, and we will come to that in just a moment. But do you see a greater push now, even in West Asia, against the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, as we know, most Arab countries are very much opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood and have either banned it or suppressed it. The United Arab Emirates has taken the lead in that. There is now a growing rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, which is traditionally opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology, although it supported and funded it for many years in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the overwhelming feeling in Arab governments is that the Muslim Brotherhood is poses a grave threat to the independence and sovereignty of those countries. And particularly, of course, it poses a threat to their governments. But there are some Islamic states that, or at least Muslim states that support it. One is Qatar, which has long had an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood and which provides it with a lot of funding. And of course, Qatar, being originally a Wahhabi state, claims that this is a tradition in Wahhabi states. And Saudi Arabia did the same thing until not so many years ago, because Wahhabism and the Takfirism of the Muslim Brotherhood were considered not only compatible, but convergent. However, that has changed now because of the growing push towards, I would say, secularization, or at least toward moderation of the Islamic practice and ideology in the kingdom. The major supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood is Egypt under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, because his party can be considered an offshoot, or in any event is an ally of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the Muslim Brotherhood is also seen as an arm of power for the projection of Turkey's influence. And therefore, that's another reason for Europe to be worried about it, because Turkey is officially part of Europe, although it's not part of the European Union, but it also has a very large population of ethnic Turks in Germany and in other European countries, such as Austria and others. Therefore, push against the Muslim Brotherhood is also a sort of a warning shot to Turkey, not to expect that it can influence and sway European policies and the West in general through the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood. Actually, it's not the Islamic Brotherhood; it's the Muslim Brotherhood, technically speaking, or the Ikhwan, the brothers, the Muslim fraternity. That's a real name of it in Arabic.
A very important point, Kom. For years, there has been a discussion on how Qatar supports the Muslim Brotherhood, but increasingly, as you were describing, the sort of pivot of strength and from where the Muslim Brotherhood gets most of its support and indeed perhaps resources from seems to have moved to Erdogan's Turkey. Now, this has, of course, ramifications around the world, and this also means that, as you were saying, that in a sense, some of the Muslim Brotherhood's outreach and work in a sense becomes Turkey sort of projecting its own ideas, its own political goals, its own power in different Western capitals and in Western societies. Talk to me a little bit more on how long this would last in Turkey, because many people also believe that Erdogan is on his last lap, so to speak, and there will be at some point change in government in Turkey too. But do you think this is a lasting idea that has got embedded in Turkey now?
Probably, because central and south eastern Turkey are now, I would say, dominated by the network of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also many Turks in those regions adhere to it, and they support Erdogan. They have supported him for all these years, as opposed to lots of liberal Turks in the west of the country, in Istanbul, and also in the south, where the exposure to Europe is much greater, and where the culture in a way is different, more Mediterranean. But Central Asian Turkey and southeastern Turkey, which has long been threatened by the Kurdish separatist movement, are in fact regard the Muslim Brotherhood as a protector of Turkish identity and of Turkish greatness. And they are thankful, or at least they are appreciative of Erdogan's role in putting Turkey on the map as it were, as a revived or resuscitated empire, because a lot of Turks were very frustrated over decades for Turkey's submissive participation in Western policies, membership of NATO, and acting as a sort sometimes of agent of the United States. So they wanted a reaffirmation of Turkey's independent imperial greatness and influence. And Erdogan, to a certain extent, has achieved that in North Africa, in the Middle East, but more than that in Central Asia. and all the way to Afghanistan, and as we know, even in Southeast Asia and in India. So that has created a claim to success, for the Muslim Brotherhood. And as a result, if power changes in Turkey and a more pro-Western secular government takes over, they will still have to contend with the AKP, with Erdogan's party, and therefore also with the Muslim Brotherhood in its grassroots influence.
Let's also talk about the Muslim Brotherhood in South Asia, which is the last thing that I wanted to discuss with you. There are, of course, echoes of Muslim Brotherhood ideology in South Asia, always has been. I'm, of course, talking about organizations like the Jamaat-e-Islami and others. They have been prevalent in India for a long time. Um, and today, geopolitically, the Jamaat seems to be really rising in Bangladesh. In fact, I'm sure both of us saw this leaked audio that has come out of this US embassy person talking to people, talking about how de facto perhaps the US is encouraging the rise of the Jamaat. Now, this, from an Indian vantage point, and indeed from a global vantage point, sounds like a very bad idea. Bangladesh has a strategic position, to allow Islamist force to rise there, to allow the Jamaat to rise there, cannot be a good idea. How do you see this? How do you see the unfolding of this?
I think this is in line with the long-standing uh, deals that have been, established made between the U.S., Great Britain, and the Muslim Brotherhood in its various hues and branches and avatars, you might say, because there's no question that many Western powers have applied a very hypocritical policy by openly condemning the Muslim Brotherhood's activities and ideology, but on the other hand, using them for certain missions as very effective agents who were willing to use extreme violence. So you can see that happening even today. And that's why you always have to take the official decisions taken against the Muslim Brotherhood with a pinch of salt, because you can expect some undercover activities and behind the scene agreements to be made. You see what's happening in Bangladesh, where it's increasingly clear that the overthrow of Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League were engineered, or at least strongly supported by the United States and possibly other Western powers. And the idea being that it would be important to weaken India in some way by using both Pakistan and Bangladesh as pressure points on India, particularly on India northeast in the case of Bangladesh, and also access to Myanmar. So there is a lot of, I guess, subversion that can take place through these agencies. And you can connect that even to Israeli policies. You see, Israel has supported Hamas for many years, provided funding, and enabled Qatar to supply funds to Hamas. And now we know that the plan that is now being touted by Jared Kushner and other members of the Trump administration, including Witkoff, that plan was made 2 years before the attack by Hamas on Israeli civilians in the north of the Gaza Strip inside Israel. It was known already, the plan to make a sort of new Gaza as a sort of development hub for tourism and for luxury accommodation, sort of a new, Côte d'Azur, as it were, or a new Riviera. That was already in the plans for a long time among American financiers. Therefore, there you can ask the question, was Israel really waiting for an attack to take place to be able to really act decisively in Gaza and wipe out Hamas, after it was realized that Hamas was becoming a very inconvenient force, even though it had been used against the Palestinian Authority to divide Palestinians. At some point, it was clearly becoming a problem. And you can understand the succession of events that have taken place in the last 3 years.
Talk to me a little bit about what the Americans and other Western powers would really hope to attain by pushing Jamaat in Bangladesh. Because it seems to me that this is, and to many people, it seems like the repetition of a mistake again and again. Similarly, Islamists were pushed in Afghanistan at one point, and look where Afghanistan is today. Look at the history of what happened after that. Now, to push the Jamaat in Bangladesh among 180 million people, in a sense would create another global hotspot of terror and a hotspot of such Islamist problems. Now, some people argue that this is to counter China, but I totally agree with you that to me also this seems like a containment strategy for a rising India. But this will only cause, I mean, if Jamaat tomorrow controls the Bay, in some senses, at least parts of the Bay of Bengal, this cannot be a good idea for strategically for the Americans. Why can't they see this?
Along there are Americans and Americans. I don't think there is a unified policy, a unified strategy, or unified perception of what needs to be done. I think a number of American power centers or agencies work on a relatively short-term basis, and they have certain agendas and missions, and probably that particular agenda, which involves Bangladesh, now is about trying to build a Bangladesh which is very pro-American and which basically listens to the US in terms of policy decisions and does not accept Indian dominance, economic or strategic. Therefore, medium-term approach is, if you talk to many American public servants, civil servants, they would tell you, those who were concerned with the Bangladesh issue, that Sheikh Hasina was very unpopular, that she had a very corrupt government, that it was impossible for her to stay in power much longer. So since she was bound to fall, the idea was to accelerate her fall and to try to make sure that whoever succeeded her would be, generally speaking, pro-American and would not fall in the arms of China. And therefore, the Muslim Brotherhood, I mean, at least the Jamaat, is seen as an anti-communist force and as an anti-Indian force. So in that sense, it can be used. And of course, you can also hear that, well, if they are powerful, then we have to deal with them, right? So let's say that the Jamaat commands a lot of popular support, then we should talk to them and we should try to use them. But of course, from that point on, you can also support them and actually boost them, which is exactly what seems to be happening. So by boosting them, we are hoping to make them allies. And then, of course, later on, you may have problems. But did that ever stop the Americans in Afghanistan? No. I mean, they knew that eventually the Taliban or whoever was before the Taliban, the Mujahideen, were not going to be pro-American. But still, they felt it was important for them to be anti-Russian. By the way, you have the same policy in Ukraine. The Ukraine could become technically fascist because there are lots of people in Ukraine who are, openly neo-Nazi, at least in circles of power. But yet, the most important thing is that they fight the Russians and they kill Russians, which is what the Americans, or at least some of the American power centers, want. And the same can be said of the Europeans, of the West Europeans.
Of course, has a really bad, echo to this, as you're pointing out, Com. In a sense, do you genuinely believe that the Jamaat is as anti-China as some American centers or some Western centers believe? Because in my opinion, actually the Jamaat is totally playing the Western powers. They are very likely to double deal with the West and with China. Sheikh Hasina was already buying arms and ammunition from China. The Bangladeshi army is very happy to buy from the Pakistanis, buy from the Americans, buy from the Chinese. And the Chinese are deeply infiltrated already in that country, especially in the Bangladeshi military. So, therefore, to assume that the Jamaat would somehow come and oust the Chinese and Chinese influence from Bangladesh seems to be very, very, ambitious and very, very optimistic. In fact, perhaps the best case for the West was, a strong India supporting a strong government in Bangladesh to keep it democratic in that sense, as far as it's possible. And yet, as you're pointing out, obviously this is not understood. I wonder how you see this entire, to me, it seems like a bit of a, pipe dream that the Jamaat will be against China. Do you think this will come true?
Nobody can tell, and I honestly do not think that the Jamaat will take a principled position against any country. They will just follow their interest and what they consider to be the interest of Bangladesh, also the interest of the Muslim Ummah, and therefore they are openly showing that they would like to be closely associated with Pakistan. The attitude to China is likely to be opportunistic, and nobody can trust what their future actions will be like. I think the Americans are playing the cards they have. And if you look at what's happening, for example, I think 2 days ago, there was a blast in a Chinese restaurant in Afghanistan. That was clearly a signal given to the Chinese by somebody, because officially the Taliban are quite happy with China investing and helping develop the country. But there are some forces in Afghanistan that are also warning the Chinese, stay away. So that could also happen in Bangladesh with Jamaat either in power or becoming a strong influence. So if that happens, of course, that's probably more in the interest of the United States. And Bangladesh can, to a point, be a bargaining chip. But the overall calculus is that Bangladesh is not an economically autonomous country. You know, it needs a lot of help, and it needs trade, it needs investments, it needs economic support. Therefore, in that way, some Western powers can play a role which would make them very influential there. And they certainly do not like to see India becoming too integrated with Southeast Asia and acquiring a dominant influence in Myanmar and in other countries through the northeast connection, through that famous bridge, which I think many Western countries are not happy about, specifically talking about Anglo-Saxon powers, because, as you know, there is that long-standing idea that the Northeast is partly Christian, and therefore it can be made into some sort of an independent unit. And as you know, there has been a noise in Bangladesh about how the Northeast should be part of Bangladesh, and so all that discourse is being heard, but it doesn't mean it will achieve its objectives. But, you know, it shows the mindset that prevails in certain parts of the world.
Last question, Kom. When you look at all of this and connect the dots and zoom out a bit, do you see that the Muslim Brotherhood, in a sense, is weaker than before? Or do you think, in fact, even though many may think that it's getting weaker because of all this pushback, especially in the West, in fact, at a subterranean level, it is getting stronger and more interconnected, especially with its deep influence in countries like the UK and, of course, growing in South Asia and so on and so forth. How do you see this?
Generally, if you ban an organization, it tends to go underground, and it can be more dangerous and more effective underground than it was when it acted more or less openly, publicly. So I think banning is not always a solution, because you don't always have the necessary means to enforce effectively the ban, right? And I think a lot depends on the stability and orientation of certain major powers in the Muslim world, such as Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and others. And also what happens to Iran, because the very deep-rooted feeling in many Muslim countries, even among moderates, is that Islamic countries are under Western colonial rule even now, in one way or another. And let's face it, this is partly true. And therefore, for example, if there is a new US-Israeli attack on Iran, which is on the cards at this point, and if Iran is badly hit and partly devastated, then I think the reaction will empower the Muslim Brotherhood, even though they are supposed to be enemies of Iran's Shia regime. There will still be a movement of Islamic solidarity and of Islamic and Muslim frustration, which will probably boost the Muslim Brotherhood, especially if there is no reaction from other Muslim states whose governments are seen to be complicit with the West. And these governments are clearly non-elected, they are authoritarian, they rest either on hereditary succession or on military force, and therefore they are fragile. And especially if the West can no longer protect them as it used to be. So that, to my mind, is a real danger, that by trying to crack down on not only on the Muslim Brotherhood, but on governments that are not seen to toe the Western line, we can think of Syria, we can think of Iraq, we can think of Libya, that can lead to a very major boost to the power of the Muslim Brotherhood. As we know right now, the West says, the Western leaders are saying in unison that they are very happy with Mr. al-Shara as president of Syria and former Al-Qaeda, supremo. So it shows that Islamic terrorist movements can very well make their peace with the West and get full blessings and support, as was the case for the Islamic State, for Daesh, for a few years. So that tells you where things go. On the one hand, you can nurture your future enemies, which is what the West has been doing. And on the other hand, you can also work with them and help them to take power because they help you to achieve certain objectives.
We leave it at that, Combe. Thanks very much for, as always, very incisive comments. Of course, this will be a developing story, and indeed, the Bangladesh elections are coming in a few days, and we will have to wait and see what pans out there. Though, I have my thoughts on what might happen, but certainly the situation will remain volatile and fragile for a while, and perhaps will get increasingly fragile as the days go by. But we will, of course, return to have more conversations with you. But for today, thanks very much for your time.
Welcome. Thanks a lot. Have a good day and all the best.
To you too. Thank you so much.